Yes, sir. That music tells us it's time to welcome in our friend Lee Diekemper, JoeBucsFan.com. Speaking of the Bucks, hey now, Bucks Jags. Lee, how are you, good sir?
Oh, it's always great having me, Jeff. I really appreciate it. And I've got a great Nico story for you. I finally got to meet Nico.
All right, well, fire away. We're going to come out the box swinging here. Let's go.
Yeah, well, obviously everybody has an opinion on Nico, and I'm sure the people have an opinion on Nico. Obviously, you see her social media presence. She's anything but bashful. And I met her after a training camp practice. I introduced myself. We've gone back and forth, Nico and I, direct messaging on Twitter quite a few times over, since the Bucks had signed her husband, Brent. And so I saw her after practice. When I introduced myself, she couldn't have been more gracious. I mean, absolutely gracious. We sat, we talked for a couple minutes. It was just a polar opposite of what she appears on Twitter and on social media. She couldn't have been nicer. And, we were talking about Jameis. She really likes Jameis, obviously. And I mentioned to her, like, hey, I always think that's pretty neat how you defend Jameis on social media. And I said, it's really a shame that Jameis still, to this day, takes pot shots. And she looked at me and smiled and she said, not on my watch.
Here's the thing. I can't imagine anybody, and this allows me to segue in, and it's interesting. You're kind of noting that Miko has a persona really more than anything else, and that maybe she's this other person. But what I'm more interested by is the second part of what you were talking about there, which is, honestly, Hard Knocks is allowing the rest of the country to see what the players in the locker room certainly know, and any of us who covered Jameis Winston know already, which is that he's a great leader, a good guy, and a tireless worker. And if anything is going to help radically alter the narrative that has been in place since his time at Florida State, I think this would probably go the furthest in doing so, Hard Knocks so far, because it's really revealed how eminently likable that guy is.
Mm-hmm. Oh, exactly. And I did not hear this, but I heard about it, that Colin Cowherd, and I know where you're going with this. We're going to talk about the little incident with the Camp Neat offensive lineman.
Sure.
Colin Cowherd commented on that yesterday. Yesterday, from what I've been told, I didn't hear it live, and he was blown away. He was absolutely blown away. He's like, this is what you call a leader. This is the quarterback you want on your team. And he was completely mesmerized by that scene in Hard Knocks Tuesday night.
Well, all of those guys can go to hell, because every one of them spoke completely out of turn without information or facts before them and made assumptions that were downright criminal, literally, at times, and he was one of them. But great.
Well, I'm no fan of his, by the way. So
well, I mean, I'm indifferent. I don't know him one way or the other. I know who he is, obviously, and I know the show that he had on ESPN, and I know the show that he has on Fox, and I understand in this business how big a name he is. I'm just noting that he, along with so many others, took the co-opted story from the New York Times and ran with it like it was the truth, and never bothered to read the investigation or any of the other informative items that would have allowed them to have an opinion based in fact. And that, to this day, bothers me, but obviously, for those of us that were here on a day-to-day basis and had interactions with him and read all of those things from the state attorney's office and knew the truth about that situation, we're probably all a little bitter, because it painted Tallahassee, it painted FSU, and it certainly painted, more importantly, Jameis Winston in a horrific light, in as about as abhorrent a light as you possibly could. That said, that scene has had a lot of run from Hard Knocks, and for those that don't know what Lee and I are talking about, it's Jameis Winston pretty upset with the backup offensive lineman that allowed a quarterback in camp competing for a job, Griffin, to get hurt. But we're going to hear the setup before they took the field and then what happened after he got hurt, because they did a terrible job of protecting him. Here's the clip from Hard Knocks the other night.
Hey, go out there. That's your quarterback, okay? Keep him clean. Look at me. I'm clean as hell. I might don't even have to take a shower. All right? Check your quarterback, okay? Protect him. I'm happy y'all having fun, but Ryan just hurt his shoulder. So keep having fun.
You know why? Let me tell you why I like that, and I think it's important. When you look around the league over the last however many years, let's just look at the modern superstar quarterback, Tom Brady chief amongst them, and then go down the list, whether it's Aaron Rodgers, or if you want to go back a little ways, you can go certainly to the recently retired Peyton Manning, and before that, you can go to John Elway, and so many others, going back to Dan Marino. Those guys had an edge to them They had a quality about them that bordered on prickishness, beyond to put it nicely. They were the kinds of guys that if you had to be around them every day, they could turn like that if they thought you were stepping out of line, not putting in the work, and not focusing the way that you needed to. They had that element that a coach has to them. And I always wondered, because Jameis is so fun-loving and kind of just a character to some extent, whether or not he had that switch, whether or not he could be the kind of jerk that I think elite quarterbacks sometimes have to be. And in that moment, you saw that he could.
Yeah, and it was not being a jerk. It was he got his point across without cussing the guy out or hollering, point made. And I thought there were so many angles that was so positive. First, as you touched upon, that showed Jameis' leadership once again. But the thing I liked about it was, the NFL is not high school. It's not college. Guys aren't on scholarships. It's not extracurricular activity. It's a freaking job. Careers are on the line, literally and figuratively. Jobs are on the line, literally and figuratively. And that's not even getting into protecting your quarterback. So these guys had to get slapped around a little bit. Like, hey, man, this isn't like high school when you're sitting on the bench and you're trying to figure out how you can drop the hammer on the homecoming queen. This is a job. This is a business. It's to be taken seriously. And by the way, if you can't protect the backup quarterback, if your number's called, how can I trust you to protect me? And you know what? If people thought that was being jerkish, so be it. Because you know what? Maybe that might wake up one of those two guys. Maybe those guys might, say, I got to take this seriously. I got to get my head straight. And maybe they make an NFL team, whether it be the Bucs or someone else, indirectly because Jameis set them straight. I don't see how anyone could take anything negative from that unless you're talking about Pee Wee football and participation trophy.
Well, it's important to note this, too, by the way. We talked with Randy Sanders, the co-offensive coordinator and quarterback coach at FSU, on Media Day, and he was talking about, we were asking about DeAndre Francois and his growth as a quarterback, and he brought back a Jameis story, and he said, listen, Jameis would be more than willing to correct teammates in front of everybody in practice if they were doing something wrong, but he was also the very first to praise them the second they did something right. And he noted that was important, that if you're going to call guys out publicly for all to see, if you're going to do something like that, you have to also be the guy that picks them up when they're doing the right thing and saying the right things. And that's how people follow you. That's how people believe in your form of leadership. And that younger quarterbacks have to learn that, because it's hard to do, because sometimes you don't want to call a guy out. But as a quarterback, you're a leader. It's ingrained in the position. You touch the ball on every offensive play. You've got to be a leader. So it's interesting to watch this show. I will say this, watching Hard Knocks, I have said from the beginning, you remember this, we had this conversation last year. I thought the draft pick of Roberto Aguayo was a mistake. I first guessed it. I've been wrong about things. I've been right about things. This isn't a braggadocious moment because I hated to see it because he's a good kid. But I worried for him, and it didn't work out, and they had to cut him. But oddly enough, and even though I screamed at my television all of last year, we should have never drafted him, I felt bad watching that. I mean, that's kind of a poignant moment. I mean, I get it's a job, cold-hearted, got to do it. They needed to cut him. When he missed the extra point the other night, I said, cut him. I'd cut him tonight. And I certainly knew when they rolled him back out there to attempt that field goal that basically was for his job. And when
I heard you talk about that earlier this week.
Yeah, I knew that was for his job. My dad was in town visiting. I said, this is for his job. This is cold-blooded right here. You either make this kick and maybe you're employed, or you miss it, you're done. And he missed, and he was done. But watching it play out, you're reminded you're reminded that, certainly he wasn't trying to miss kicks, and it meant a lot to him. He just wasn't good enough. I thought that was a good scene, at the very least, in Hard Knocks, to watch that play out the way that it did.
It was a good scene, and generally, Hard Knocks, one of the draws of Hard Knocks is when they cut players. I hate to say it, but that's a draw. It's kind of like a car crash moment. You're sitting there, rubbernecking. And granted, I was eager to watch that as anyone else was. Obviously HBO, we knew it was coming. Clearly it was coming. I thought that was drawn out a little bit more. It was almost like they kept hanging in there, wanting people to hang in there like, oh, my gosh, he's going to cry. He's about ready to cry. And I I just felt uncomfortable with that. Granted, I was rubbernecking like we all were, but I thought that was drawn out a little bit too much. It was almost like you're teasing people, like he's about ready to cry. He's about ready to cry, and that was just a weird feeling. That's all I can say about that. Weird feeling.
Well, but I like that they were able to give us some insight into how the process plays out. That Jason Light and Cotter were talking amongst each other and then having a conversation, and they wanted to do it, earlier, but they decided to sleep on it. And I think last year, you certainly are at those press conferences all the time. I'm not. I watch from afar and pull them up on my computer the next day oftentimes too. But I could tell throughout the course of the year that Dirk was pretty much at his wits' end with Roberto Aguayo throughout the season. And I think had he not been drafted so highly, he'd have been cut long before the other day.
I absolutely agree. He probably wouldn't have made it through midseason last year. You could tell he was frustrated, especially the latter part of the season, when the Bucs were in a playoff run, and he obviously didn't trust Aguayo, but he had no one else. And so I don't blame Cutter. Cutter wanted someone that go out there that he was confident in that would, kick an extra point, for example, much less a field goal. And you're absolutely right. If Cutter was fully honest, he probably would have cut Aguayo, right around the Chiefs game. Oh, by the way, the Chiefs, he helped win that game against the Chiefs. Here's one for you about Aguayo. And I can't remember. Oh, yeah, it was Trey Wingo. I skinned Trey Wingo. It's not the first time I've done it. But it was the second time I've done it. Trey Wingo comes out and says, this is the worst draft pick in NFL history.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is just so patently idiotic. I can barely put it into words how stupid it is. Aguayo's not even the worst second-round draft pick in the last 15 years with the Bucs, much less the worst NFL pick in history. I mean, give me a break.
Yeah, no, they're
Juan
all...
Bowers, the bad Dexter Jackson, Stabby the GOAT. And that's just recent history for the Bucs.
Oh, my man, Savvy. I remember screaming at the top of my lungs at that one.
I'm sorry to give you flashbacks there,
You
Jeff.
are. I'm getting really worried about this. Hey, as far as the game goes, two things. Chippiness, can you give me some insight on the melee between the Bucs and the Jags? And, of course, they play tonight, so I'm going to ask you a secondary question after you answer that one.
Oh, it was getting really, really chippy. My favorite one, well, first there was, I can't remember the gentleman's name for the Jags. Maybe I shouldn't use gentleman. He drilled Donovan Smith in the grill with a right hook, and all of a sudden here comes Brawley Joe Hawley. He comes flying in. He's ready to take on three guys. They had a melee with that. But the best one was, and I can't remember the tight end's name with the Jags, play was basically over, and Conti hit the ground. This guy falls on top of Conti and drills his head into the turf like you would see on pro wrestling, I can't remember the wrestler's name. I think Johnny Valentine.
Oh,
yeah, he'd kneel on the guy's neck and hold his arms out like, what am I doing wrong?
Yeah. Yeah, there was...
It was one of those kind of deals, and that started the brawl. And so, yeah, it was getting very, very chippy out there. And most of it seemed like the Jags were doing the chippiness. And believe it or not, Dante Fowler didn't get into a fight. That was, whoa, Dante Fowler not fighting? You're Lakewood alumni there.
We don't claim him. We don't. All right, for the game tonight, how long do the starters play?
It's looking like close to the first half. And as I always say about preseason games, to me, there's one goal: to make sure all of your players return home without the aid of crutches, a sling, or any sort of neck brace.
By the way, and I agree with that, obviously the preseason, I just hold my breath in these games. I've argued for years that you can't glean nearly as much as you think you can watching these preseason games. The general fan will watch a player play well in a preseason game and assume that's going to equate to them having a great year or play poorly and think that they're not any good, and that's not always the case. These teams are typically not scheming for one another. A lot of down-distance stuff is awkward in preseason games and wouldn't exist as it is in the NFL in regular season, just in terms of the calls. There are some things you can look for, obviously, with position battles and so forth. But I do wonder, just generally speaking, how is camp going? How has preseason gone to this point? I know what we see on Hard Knocks, but that's just a fraction. How is camp going?
Well, the defense is ahead of the offense. Defense looks pretty strong, believe it or not. Defense looks strong. To quickly back up your point about they don't game plan or anything like that, Joe McCoy's come right out and said, preseason games, I'm just working on technique.
Right.
Nothing else.
Yeah,
I'm just working on technique.
Well, it's a little bit like spring training baseball. You'll watch a pitcher working on a changeup, and he'll give up 3 home runs in an inning, and everybody thinks, oh, so-and-so doesn't have it this year. I'm like, he's working on a pitch. The results don't matter. He's working on a pitch. Yeah.
Absolutely, Jeff. I've written that before. That's a perfect analogy. Hitters will go up there and they're just looking for breaking pitches to swing at. They don't care about fastballs. They'll take 3 right down the middle. They're working on trying to hit breaking pitches. So perfect analogy right there. And you asked me something I can't remember. How's camp going? There's something that I guess uneasy. Before I get going here, I have to be up front. I love Noah Spence. He's a warrior. That game he played against the Panthers, he had a separated shoulder.
Yeah.
They shoved it back in on the freaking field. He's out there tackling Cam Newton with one arm. I can't say enough about the guy's attitude and his work ethic, his drive. He's just a warrior. But he's had a quiet training camp. He really has. Now, I have to be fair. Part of that is Cutter has explicit directions to the defense not to go full bore. They don't have a full green light. They don't want they're blowing up their teammates on offense. So that might be part of it. But he's had a rather quiet camp. Now, in the joint practices against Jaguars, he was going crazy. I was not at the joint practice. I'm in Jacksonville right now. I'll be at the game. But I was not at the practices earlier this week. My business partner, Steve Isbitz, was there, and he was just telling me, and we do have video on JoeBucsFan.com, Spence was just blowing right past offensive linemen, left tackles for the Jags. He was like a warrior. So if I'm going to look at anything for the game, I want to see Noah Spence start doing something, specifically playing against the run. That's his bugaboo. He's not that good against the run. The Bucs think he can pass rush, but they want him to be more than a one-dimensional player. So that might be something to look at. But overall, I think camp's going to be, I'm telling you, you know how Bucs fans are. Some of them, they nitpick everything to death. And Jameis has a reputation of some degree that he overthrows players. I have not seen him overthrow Deshaun Jackson yet. I have not seen that yet. And Chris Godwin, keyword yet, but I haven't seen it yet. And Chris Godwin, I think this guy might be somebody special. I've been burned by Kenny Bell in the past. I think he's past the Kenny Bell. Thank goodness he's past the Kenny Bell, the magical line, if you want to call it that. I think he's past that, but I think he's going to be a pretty darn good player. I really do. Coaches are raving about him. You go out there and watch practice. He rarely, if ever, drops the ball. He's physical. He'll go up and get a ball in the traffic. No big deal. He might be a special guy.
Real quick, last thing, because Tom's yelling at me from the other side of the glass, waving his hands. He desperately needs to know, and I've ignored him. So I won't ignore him any longer. He wants to know, how is O.J. Howard playing?
O.J. Howard is a freak. He's an absolute freak. And here's something that's rather interesting. I've noticed Jameis throws passes to different receivers in different ways. For example, he throws passes to Mike Evans and O.J. Howard always high, always. And the theory is, give him a chance. Big enough. Give him a chance. Give him a chance. He won't throw that way to other receivers. He will throw that way to O.J. Howard and Mike Evans. O.J. Howard is a freak. He's an absolute freak. And I've been cautioned by Bucs coaches that, hey, tight ends really don't do a whole lot their rookie year. Anthony Beck, the former Bucs tight end, works for ESPN. He told me the same thing. I'm going to write that story sometime next week. But I'm telling you, O.J. Howard, I was hoping they'd draft Alvin Cook, but I am not at all displeased. They got this guy. This guy is a freak of nature. And a real quick one, and maybe it's something to do with the water in Alabama. We all know about Jameis, his leadership, his drive, his passion. Quan Alexander's the same way. He's an Alabama guy. O.J. Howard, he came off the practice field one time. I talked to him. I've never, ever, ever seen a guy as spent as I saw O.J. Howard. And he's generally on the practice field a half hour after practice working on red zone drills with Jameis. And I've never seen a guy so physically spent in my life. And I told him, like, man, you are really sucking air. And he's like, you got to do it to be great. You got to do it to be great. And all the intangibles are there, and the physical elements are there. It's just a matter of time. This guy is going to be a stud.
I love to hear it. I think the commonality there is that all of those guys are working hard to get the hell out of Alabama. And that's probably Lee, be well, brother. Always good talking to you. Take care.
Stay here, Jeff. Thanks again.
All right. Take care, man. Lee Diekemper, JoeBucsFan.com, the website. You can read his latest stuff there. And obviously he'll be covering the game tonight with Bucs Jags. And you just knock on wood. I know there are a lot of Jaguar fans listening to this show and obviously Bucs fans. Truthfully, these games, man, I don't care who wins them at all. I don't care what the final score is. I care that in this case, both sides get out of it healthy. I just don't. Preseason irks me to begin with for a variety of reasons. I get why it exists, and to some degree why it has to exist. It's just that I worry to death that people are going to get hurt before we ever get to the live bullets where it really matters.
I'll admit this going in that it's a joke and it's a jab because I don't think the numbers work. But I look forward to seeing future Tampa Bay Buccaneer linebacker Telvin Smith tonight because his contract's coming up, and I don't think he's staying in Jacksonville.
Well, he's good, man. And for a guy that was undersized here and is undersized in the league, he plays, and he makes a ton of tackles, and he's always around the ball, and it's fun to watch. You know, the problem with him down the line will be when some of that speed goes away because he doesn't take on blockers. So what you can do is run around blockers if you're that lightning fast. But in reality, you don't want linebackers playing with his technique as consistently, because most can't do that. And when his speed drops, I think the lack of size is going to come back again.
What's incredible to me, I was thinking about Telvin yesterday because I heard the clips of you talking to Derwin James, and he said he was at 222, and he wanted to get down to 218.
218, yeah, he was worried about 4 pounds.
Telvin plays at like 212, and he's not as tall. It's just incredible to think about what Derwin James is as an athlete, because you have one of the great linebackers in program history.
I don't know how he's only 220, by the way. Standing next to Derwin James yesterday, and sitting next to him, standing next to him, he's gotten huge. I mean, that's 220. If he's just 220, it's 220 of pure muscle, and he's jacked. He's a lot bigger than he used to be, and he was already in great shape, obviously, but he's gotten big.
It's just amazing. And I didn't watch Derek play here because Derek Brooks was undersized, and he was kind of a tweener, and we know
played
that
those
story.
giant shoulder pads.
Exactly, makes him look a little bit bigger.
Yeah, all of them.
I did see his professional career.
Sure.
And, yeah. But, Telvin is one of the athletic freaks to come through the program in Jimbo Fisher's time here. I mean, with the speed, the closing speed, and then how ferocious he was.
You know who was a freak, but he never really made those kinds of plays that allow for him to stick out in the way that we talk about Telvin and some others. Christian Jones was a freak.
Oh, man.
He walked on campus the first day he was here, and I thought he was an outside linebacker in the NFL. I mean, you just look at him and you thought, well, what is that?
And for me, he's still playing here because I'll say his name once or twice this year. But, I mean, just think about how freakish Telvin was.
Yeah.
And Derwin's bigger, and he's not playing linebacker as
and
a primary position.
He can play everywhere.
Right? Good Lord.
I still think it's great with Derwin. You'll hear the audio. We're going to play it for you tomorrow. We're going to have a lot of the audio tomorrow from the stuff that I did with Andy Staples after it runs tonight on SiriusXM, but we'll be able to run it tomorrow, and I can't wait because I want you guys all to hear it, and I know some people aren't going to be listening tonight or they don't have satellite radio, but we'll play it tomorrow. The story about him, obviously we've all watched the GIF of him just embarrassing that Florida offensive lineman and how he hates that that's kind of the thing he's known for because it was poor technique. He actually he broke contain. And his dad got on him after the game and told him, well, that's nice, but you did everything wrong there. I said, believe me, Florida State fans don't care. It's one of our favorite GIFs. We'll watch it from now until we're no longer here. I mean, it's a classic moment. And he chuckled, but he's like, yeah, but it's bad tape. Like, no, don't worry. You got enough good tape, brother. You're going to be all right. Jeff Cameron Show will come back, wrap it up momentarily.